Hey guys, welcome. Good evening. How are all of you doing? And how is the preparation for the board exam? Hello. Welcome and good evening, first of all, and welcome to the last session for grade 10, that is our environment chapter, right? So, I hope you people were able to make use of these sessions where we tell you what things are important from the examination point of view, right? So, today we are going to deal with chapter our environment. Now, before I start, we guys already know that this chapter is interesting and pretty easy, right? So there are not much things that should bother you here, but there are just a few topics that if you are in touch with, you will be safe to go with your exams, right? So let us go ahead without wasting time and try to understand this chapter or what things we need to do in this chapter, right? So the first thing that we come the chapter is about our environment, right? So we right away start with definition of ecosystem, right? So ecosystem refers to the interactions between living things among themselves and with their environment. Very important. Many people confuse with the definition of ecosystem. Don't make that mistake. Make sure that you're writing that correctly. Now, you should also be aware about the types and components. So now, when I'm talking about types of ecosystem, it can be terrestrial or aquatic based on the environment, right? Or it can be natural and man-made. Natural, that is something that occurs in nature itself, and man-made is something that we make, humans make, right? For example, an aquarium, right? Or let's say a dustbin. So these ecosystems are man-made. You make it. The crop field, it was not existing in nature by itself, right? So you should be able to tell the examples. Now, terrestrial and aquatic, you should be aware about the examples as well. Terrestrial, you have Amazon, right, in South America, and then you have aquatic ecosystem. The example can be the Great Barrier Reef. Now, next we come to the components of ecosystem. Swayam management of natural resources is done. Okay, I believe. Okay, now components. Now, when we come to talk about the components, we will be covering biotic and abiotic components. Biotic means living, right? We know that, and abiotic means non-living. Rajat, that chapter will be explained to you, or I think has already been explained to you by Bhanu sir, right? It's in chemistry. Now, then we talk about the interaction as we defined ecosystem as the interactions between biotic, the living things and their among themselves and with their environment, right? So we discuss the interactions between biotic and abiotic and between the abiotic components themselves as well. So both of the things are covered here, right? So what specifically we have to cover in interactions? We have to first cover the food chain, which is the transfer of matter and energy from one organism to other, right? So how do we define food chain? It's a series of organisms related to each other by the feeding habit, right? Now, important in food chain is the 10% law. Now, what is the 10% law? The 10% law basically says that from every trophic level to the next, only 10% of energy is available. 90% of the energy is dissipated out, right? It's lost in heat, in respiration, right? Vikram, that is what the 10% law is, that only the 10% of energy is passed from one trophic level to the next. Now, something to remember here and understand is that we are talking about the trophic level and not organism specific, right? So I'm not talking about a lion and a deer. I have to talk about the entire trophic level, right? Sorry. So we can talk about producers to consumers and so on. Now, food web. Now, food web is it's an interconnected web of several food chains, right? So, several food chains are connected to each other, right? An organism can eat more than one, and it can be eaten by more than one, and that leads to food web. Now, one of the consequence that we need to be aware while we are talking about food chain, food web is biomagnification. Here, one distinction is to be made, and that is the difference between biomagnification and bioaccumulation. Now, bioaccumulation is increase in concentration in one organism. For example, if The if there is too much mercury in the water, the fishes will start uh, accumulating mercury in themselves. That is bioaccumulate. It's in one organism. But when it starts happening across trophic levels, that is termed as biomagnification, right? So that is termed as biomagnification. That means first there were phytoplanktons. Many phytoplanktons are eaten by zooplanktons, zooplankton by small fishes, and we find that the concentration of mercury goes on increasing across trophic levels. That is biomagnification, right? So we should be able to differentiate between bioaccumulation and magnification. What is trophic level? Jyoti has asked. Jyoti, trophic level is a group of organisms with the same feeding habit. Okay, what are decomposers? Decomposers are a group of organisms that perform the job of breaking down of molecules into smaller components, or that perform the job of breaking down larger substances into simpler substances. Right now, decomposers and detritivores. Make sure that you understand the difference between those. Detritivores will also perform the job of decomposition, but they are mouth creatures. For example, earthworms. So don't confuse between detritivores and decomposers. Okay. Yes, Vaishnavi, when it transfers across a trophic level, that is magnification. Eutrophication, I will talk about that. Don't worry, Sorry, I will talk about that. Coliform is a group of bacteria. Okay, its presence generally indicates the level of pollution, and it is so because coliform has a certain group of coliforms are harmful. They are pathogenic. Okay, that is why its presence, its absence is considered a factor for the safe drinking or the potability of water. If they are not present, then the water is potable. Coliform also live in the intestine, but not all coliforms are bad. Some of them are. Okay. What is it? We'll talk about incineration, Ishan. No, don't worry. So then we talk about after completing the ecosystem, magnification, and food chain and food web, we talk about the disturbances that take place in the ecosystem. And the first and foremost thing is that we generate too much of waste, right? So we need to talk about the three kinds of waste on the basis of the state, that is solid, liquid, gases. You need to be aware about the examples. Right now, when we talk about solid, we talk about biodegradable and non-biodegradable waste, right? So we know that sorting of waste into biodegradable and non-biodegradable makes our job easier to manage the waste. Biodegradable waste can be decomposed by a process of composting, which is carried out by bacteria and fungi. Non-biodegradable waste has to be treated via incineration, that is burning them out, or simply deposit them in a sanitary landfill. So these are the three methods that we choose for management of waste, right? Okay, then we talk about liquid waste. For liquid waste, we have the treatment plants, right, where we remove the physical impurities, chemical impurities, and biological impurities. So all the impurities are treated in liquid. You don't need to deal in detail. Okay, Ritika, that is a question related with control and coordination. The plant bending, it's because of the hormone auxin. Okay, it's because of the synthesis of hormone auxin, which leads to expansion of cells, and thus the plant bends away. Okay, uh, now talking about gases. So when we talk about the gaseous waste, the two most important wastes that you need to be talking about are greenhouse gases and CFC slash ODS. So what's ODS? ODS are ozone depleting substances. CFC is an example. So CFC is an ozone depleting substance, and what it does is it depletes the ozone that is present in the stratosphere. Now here you need to understand that ozone is present even in the troposphere, right? But when it's present in the troposphere, it's of no use to humans, right? Rather, it's a pollutant when it's present in the troposphere. So we are concerned largely with the ozone's presence in the stratosphere, right? There, because of the presence of chlorofluorocarbons, it is destroyed, right? So if it when it is present in the stratosphere, it absorbs the UV radiation, and because of that, we are protected from the ultraviolet rays. Okay, so that is why we need to reduce the production of CFCs. How do we manage the gaseous waste? So generally we manage them by international policies and national policies. You should be aware about the UNEP, which the United Nations Environmental Program, which has instituted several international protocols. Okay, these protocols were the ones that were used for the control of ODS, for example, the Montreal Protocol, right? How the CFCs destroy the ozone gas. Okay, okay, let's try to understand that. Mm, okay, so we have CFCs are chlorofluorocarbons, right? And we know O3 is ozone. So in presence of CFC, we have the UV rays, which leads to generation of the nascent chlorine. I'm not writing the exact reactions, but basically they generate the reactive chlorine. Let me remove that dot. That's not correct. Okay, yeah. So the nascent chlorine is very reactive and it reacts with ozone, forming oxygen and ClO, right? This ClO further breaks into again nascent chlorine and this active oxygen, this nascent chlorine again institutes the same process. So in this we see that it starts a chain reaction where the ozone molecule is split into oxygen and reactive oxygen species. So we are reducing, our CFCs are reducing the amount of ozone that is there in the stratosphere. Now, the problem is that if we reduce the emissions of CFCs, then the normal processes that already happen in the atmosphere will maintain the proper level of the ozone. Okay, how is ozone? Full form of GHG is greenhouse gases swam. Vikram, just a moment, I will answer that question. So, okay, let me first discuss greenhouse gases, then we'll come back to someone was asking, how is ozone harmful? Okay, first let's discuss ozone. How is ozone harmful? Travel through the lens. I'm using your, I think, channel name. Guys, see, if you are just controlling the ODS, the ozone depleting substances, you don't need to do anything else because the natural processes themselves create and destroy ozone. So if you just remove the ozone depleting substances, the gaseous waste that humans are inputting into the atmosphere, you don't need to do anything else. That's the good thing about nature. It takes care of itself. Now, talking about how is ozone harmful? So, tropospheric ozone is harmful. When the ozone is present in the troposphere, it leads to several problems. Now, what are those problems? Most of the problems are concerned with the respiratory diseases. Okay, it causes irritation of the lungs. It causes aggravation of asthma. Okay, so that is the major problem. Okay, right? Next, we'll be talking about the greenhouse gas. What's a greenhouse gas? Greenhouse gas is any gas that is capable of absorbing the reflected radiation from the earth. So when the earth receives sun rays, they are reflected back to an extent, and that reflected radiation is absorbed by these greenhouse gases, which the example of such can be carbon dioxide, methane, even water vapor is a greenhouse gas, and even ozone is a greenhouse gas. You should be knowing that. That is another way in which tropospheric ozone is harmful. Prachi, there's no main name of liquid waste. You just got to know the examples of liquid waste. What examples can be? The sewage discharge. Okay, right? So I am bio and biological magnification is the same thing. They are not different. So GHGs, that is carbon dioxide, CH4, water, and methane. These are the four main greenhouse gases. Now, these gases are creating a problem because greenhouse effect was something that was in place normally. Without greenhouse effect, our temperature would go down by huge amounts. The average surface temperature would drop to -18. Okay, but if the concentration of these gases increase to such an extent that it has right now, what happens is too much of absorption takes place. of the reflected radiation, and the surface temperature is increasing. Mohini, I will answer that just a moment. Okay, so the surface temperature of Earth is increasing, and now in the past century, the increase is about 1 degrees. Okay, so we don't want that happening. We don't want this accelerated heating of the earth. That is why we should reduce the greenhouse gases. Now, DDT, dichloro, diphenyl, trichloro, ethane, I think. So DDT was used as a pesticide. Okay, the problem is DDT also biomagnifies, which we did not know when its use was intensified, maybe during the World War. Okay, okay, cool. So now let's go uh, back and try to understand certain questions or types of questions that come from this chapter. So, what are the theory-based chapter questions that come? So, waste management. So, can be asked about incineration. Make sure that you know about composting, because composting comes directly or indirectly through several questions. So, you should be aware about composting. Then the energy pyramids. I did not talk about energy pyramids in my mind map, but because it's something of its own. So you should be aware about the energy pyramids. Ozone, sort of, obviously you can prepare ozone in the lab, but that's of no use because it will be using too much of energy. So what's the difference between global warming and greenhouse effect? Good question. I'm going to address you via creations. See, creations, the thing is, greenhouse effect is the trapping of reflected heat by the tropospheric gases. That is the greenhouse effect, which is necessary to happen. It keeps on happening because there are certain gases in the atmosphere that absorb the heat radiated back from the earth. When the absorption of heat, or I should say when the greenhouse effect increases to a lot extent, which has happened, which is happening right now, the phenomena is termed as global warming because the surface temperature is increasing more rapidly than it should. Okay, that is the difference between the greenhouse effect and global warming. Yes, you can write Elizabeth, but make sure that firstly you are mentioning carbon dioxide and methane. Then you can go for water, you can go for ozone. Those are correct options. But make sure first you write carbon dioxide and methane. Okay. Now talking about energy pyramids, as someone already is saying, so it's simply a relation between the producers, consumers, so primary consumers, secondary consumers, and tertiary consumers, right? So this is how I'm drawing a good diagram, but you should. Okay. And why do we draw it in this shape? Because we know that only 10% of energy is passed. Then the ozone depletion question regarding the ozone depletions uh, can be asked. So make sure that you do remember that. Now, this is a question that appeared in the last board question paper. Let's try to understand this. One important information that VBQ, value-based questions, are discontinued in the board pattern. So won't be doing the third one. What are the types of pyramids? At this point of time, you just need to be aware about the energy pyramid. There are several types which you don't need at this level. You study that only in the 12th standard, okay, when you deal with several other things. Now, so this question, let's try to understand this question. Students in a school listen to the news read in the morning assembly that the mountain of garbage in Delhi suddenly exploded and various vehicles got burned under it. Several people were also injured, and there was a traffic jam all around it. So finally, so there was a discussion about solution to the problem of garbage. Now you have to suggest solutions here. Suggest two measures to manage the garbage that we produce. So can someone answer this for me? The question number A: what are the two measures that we can take to manage the garbage? Aditya, see, that's a hypothetical question. And see, when we talk about the 10% law, we take certain assumptions. Okay, so all of that comes into factor. Okay, so see, some people are giving a mixed response. So first thing is, Management of garbage can be via waste management practices, which can be composting. You can manage waste via composting. You can also manage waste via sorting them. If you sort the waste at your own place into biodegradable and non biodegradable, even that can happen, right? But if you talk about generating the least garbage, here you can use the 3R principle: reduce, reuse, recycle, right? So this is a 3R principle that you can use, right? So composting and sorting are the first answers to the A, and 3R principle is the answer to the B. Now, we won't be doing the values question. Now, sample papers are questions that was released by the CBSE. So how is ozone both beneficial and damaging? How can we prevent the damaging effect of ozone? So can someone answer this, please? Yes, there. See, if you Pankaj, if you go about there might be 7 hours, but you don't need them. If at all you want to know, the other two arts are, some people say rot, some people say repurpose, some people say refuse. So they it goes to 7, but you don't worry about it. You should be worried about the 3 R's: reuse, reduce, recycle. You can add rot, repurpose, or refuse in any manner you like. Okay. Refuse is basically that you say no to things that you don't need, and repurpose is you repurpose things to some other means. For example, let's say you are buying some food, and you get a clay pot with it. You can, instead of throwing the clay pot, you can use it to store something else, right? Now, beneficial ozone, why? Because it protects us from the UV rays, and without the UV rays, Earth would go haywire, right? Rot means to allow things to compost in your own garden. That is rot. Okay. Now, why it's damaging? Because when it is present in the troposphere, it leads to several respiratory problems like aggravation of asthma, several diseases, right? And also, it's a greenhouse gas. Now, how can we prevent the damaging effects of ozone? By we make sure that it's not depleted, and we make sure that ozone is not released in the troposphere in huge quantities, right? Four effects of ozone layer depletion. See, the first and foremost effect is the UV ray. Now, we all know UV ray is a mutagen. So it will cause skin problems. It will cause mutations in amphibians. It will now I'm writing AMP, that means amphibians. It will cause mutations in fishes, because all of these have external fertilization, right? Now, because it's a mutagen, it will also affect the crops, right? So all of these are certain problems that ozone depletion can cause, right? Now, the flow of energy between various components of the environment has been extensively studied. Give an outline of the findings. The flow of energy between the various components. Now, here you can understand what they're talking about, right? Question number 2. Can someone answer this for me? The flow of energy. Go ahead. Yes, you have to talk about the unidirectional flow. You have to talk about the 10% law, and maybe you can end up drawing a pyramid. Okay, because if you draw a pyramid, it's very pictorial, and it's very certain that you know the answer, right? So as you know, there are no diagrams in this chapter. Now, when I say diagrams, the one diagram that can be asked is the pyramid, or one food chain. Just remember, one food chain at least. If they ask a question regarding a food chain, you should be able to draw one. Now, draw doesn't mean that you draw the organisms really there. Okay, so you should be just able to point out the names and the arrows, and that will do just fine. Mark plus one scheme. It's a 3-marker question. Make sure you have 3 points and one example, or 4 points, one an example. The energy pyramid, Saksham. Now, next, answer questions with diagrams and flowcharts wherever possible. Can food web come? It won't be. You can be asked to draw one. It can be, although it's very rare, but you can be. Make sure you know one example. Now, practice questions from question bank. Guys, it's very important that you practice questions. Because this chapter seems easy, many of you skip certain topics from this and end up losing marks. Don't do that. Okay, so that is me today, and so I hope that this session was helpful to you. If you want to know, you can try our Power Pack premium courses. Visit the link, and they will also send you certain links in the messages so that you can get certain help from there as well. Okay, so that's me signing off, guys. I hope you people learn something and make use of it. And all the best for your exams. Right? Bye bye. Take care.